You remember where you were. Everyone does. It was a Tuesday, a completely unremarkable day that would become the most remarkable in history. You were probably doing something simple, something human, making coffee perhaps, or stuck in traffic, wondering what to have for dinner. The universe, it seemed, had other plans for your evening meal. It started not with a bang, but with a whisper, a sound that wasn't a sound. It arrived at the deep space listening posts first, places like Arecibo and the Square Kilometer Array. At first, the experts thought it was a malfunction, a system glitch, a ghost in the multi-billion-dollar machine. The signal was clean, too clean. It had a structure, a repeating pattern that felt ancient and impossibly vast. It wasn't radio. It wasn't microwaves. It was something else entirely, something that traveled on the very fabric of space-time. The signal rippled outwards from the listening posts. It appeared on every screen, every speaker, every device connected to the global network. It didn't scream for attention. It simply was. A low, resonant hum. A feeling more than a sound. A single, pure note that vibrated in your bones. You felt it in your teeth, in the marrow of your soul. It was the feeling of deep, cold water. The pressure of an ocean you could not see. Panic did not erupt immediately. That came later. The first reaction was confusion, a global, collective. What was that? News channels scrambled for answers. Governments issued statements that said nothing at all. Experts offered theories. A natural star-born phenomenon, a previously unknown type of pulsar. They were trying to fit an impossible peg into a very round hole. They were trying to explain away the feeling, the cold, deep feeling of being watched. You stood there with your cooling coffee or your stalled car. You looked at the sky. It was the same sky as yesterday, the same blue, the same clouds. Yet, it was different. You knew it was different. Everyone knew. The world held its breath. For 3 full days, the whisper continued. A constant, unnerving reminder, a cosmic dial tone from a caller who refused to speak. It was a test of nerves on a planetary scale. A test humanity was not exactly acing. Some people prayed, some people partied. Most just watched the sky and waited. On the 4th day, the whisper stopped. The silence that followed was somehow louder, more terrifying than the hum itself. You felt the absence of the pressure. The sudden release made you dizzy. For 12 hours, the world dared to hope. Maybe it was over. Maybe it was just a strange fluke, a story to tell your grandkids. The day the planet heard a weird noise. A funny little anecdote in the grand story of your life. Humanity has a wonderful capacity for self-delusion. It's one of our more charming and dangerous traits. The hope was a fleeting thing, a candle flame in a hurricane. Because then, they arrived. They did not appear as a single ship in the sky. There was no grand entrance over a major city. One moment, the sky was empty. The next, it was not. A vessel materialized over every town, every city, every significant human settlement on the planet, from New York to a remote village in the Amazon. No one was left out. Everyone got a front row seat to the end of the world as you knew it. They hung there in the air, motionless, soundless, perfect and terrible in their symmetry. They were not ships of metal and fire. They looked organic, like seeds polished smooth by a billion years of travel. Their hulls were a dark, iridescent material. It shifted in color from obsidian black to deep violet. There were no visible windows, no weapon ports, no seams or rivets, just a flawless, unbroken surface. They didn't reflect the sunlight. They seemed to swallow it, absorbing the light and leaving a patch of colder air beneath them. You stood with millions of others, your neck craned upwards. Fear was a cold knot in your stomach. But there was also awe. You were looking at undeniable proof. You were not alone. The most profound question of your species answered. And the answer was terrifying. These were the envoys. They did not broadcast a message of peace. They did not issue demands. They simply waited, a silent global audience to humanity's collective gasp. The world's militaries were helpless. You can't shoot at a ghost. You can't bomb an object that might not even be solid. For a full day they hung there, a silent vigil. Then they spoke, but not with words. The communication was a flood. A torrent of information poured directly into every human mind. It was not a violation. It was an offering, a terrible gift of knowledge. You saw what they saw. You felt what they felt. Their journey was a flight, an escape from a horror that had consumed their home, a terror that was now sweeping across the galaxy, unstoppable and absolute. They weren't invaders. They were messengers. They were refugees. And they were the bearers of the worst news in the history of existence. The vision they shared was a nightmare given form. You saw their world, a planet of crystal spires and singing winds, a civilization that had mastered energy and art. It was beautiful, so painfully beautiful. And you watched it die. You saw the edge of their star system begin to dim. Not like an eclipse, it was a stain, a patch of wrongness spreading across the velvet curtain of space. The stars did not just go out. They were consumed, eaten by a silence that was not empty, but full of a hungry, patient darkness. The envoys called it the devouring silence. It was not a fleet, it was not an army. It was a presence, a living plague that fed on light and life. It moved between the stars like a spill of ink on white paper. Wherever it went, it left nothing behind. No energy, no matter, no radiation. Just a perfect chilling void, a hole in the universe, an absolute zero where something used to be. The concept was so alien, so complete, that your mind struggled to grasp it. It was like trying to imagine a new color. They showed you their desperate flight, trillions of souls abandoning their dying world, a frantic exodus into the void. They ran for centuries. They watched from afar as their sun, a brilliant blue giant, was snuffed out like a candle. The silence did not chase them with malice. It simply expanded, indifferent, inevitable, like the tide coming in. It was a force of nature, a galactic extinction event. And it was coming. The data flood continued. It showed you more, so much more. It showed you the ghosts, the echoes of other civilizations, other species that had faced the silence and lost. You saw worlds of liquid methane where creatures of pure energy swam in glowing seas. You saw them flicker and die as the silence rolled over their planet. The seas turned to black, still glass. The light was gone, forever. You saw a race of silicon beings. They had built cities that were single, interconnected organisms, vast, thinking mountains that touched the clouds. You witnessed the silence touch their world. The crystal peaks crumbled to gray dust. The thinking mountains fell silent. Their billion-year-old thoughts erased in an instant. The scale of the loss was staggering. It was a graveyard of gods, each one fallen to the same quiet, creeping doom. You saw a species that had abandoned physical form. They existed as pure consciousness, a psychic network spanning an entire nebula. They were brilliant, ancient, wise. They met the silence with thoughts of peace and unity. They tried to reason with it, understand it. The silence did not respond. It simply consumed their nebula, their collective mind shattered into a trillion silent screams. Then, nothing. The envoys showed you 12 such extinctions. 12 unique, vibrant forms of life, erased. Their silent worlds were a grim testament, a warning written in the dust of dead galaxies. You saw the pattern. The silence was not random. It was methodical. It moved towards the brightest parts of the galaxy. It hunted for the richest sources of life and energy. It was drawn to light, like a moth to a flame it intended to extinguish. And after showing you this cosmic cemetery, this endless parade of death, the envoys showed you a map of the Milky Way. You saw the creeping edge of the silence, a ragged border of absolute nothingness. It was already inside our galaxy, moving steadily, patiently, and at the center of its projected path was a small, unremarkable yellow star, with a fragile blue-green world orbiting it. Your world, Earth? The message was clear. You are next. The silence would be here in less than 1 standard century. 100 years. It felt like an eternity and no time at all. What could you do? What could any civilization do against a foe that eats stars? The envoys had run for 1,000 years. They had no weapons that could stop it. Their science had no answer. They came to you not as saviors, but as fellow victims, to warn you, to bear witness to your end, as others had surely borne witness to theirs. A profound despair settled over the planet, the kind of despair that is heavy and cold. The knowledge was too much to bear. The future was not just uncertain, it was gone, replaced by a single, terrifying certainty: annihilation. But then, the envoys gave you one last piece of information. The reason they had come all this way. The reason they had chosen you. It was a sliver of data, a footnote in the grand, terrible story. It was about your DNA. It seemed that among all the life they had encountered, all the fallen gods and cosmic minds, humanity was unique. You possessed a hidden gift, a dormant potential that had slept within your very cells for millennia. The envoys themselves did not fully understand it. Their own biology was vastly different. But their scans had detected it, a sequence in your genetic code that was not found anywhere else, a sequence that hummed with a strange, resonant energy. They showed you simulations, projections based on their understanding of star science. The dormant gene was connected to bioluminescence, but not the simple chemical light of a firefly or a deep-sea fish. This was something more, something on a quantum level. The potential to generate and control light that was not just visible, but tangible. A light that could push back against the physical world. A light that could, theoretically, push back against the dark. The gene was an evolutionary quirk, a leftover from a much earlier stage of life on Earth, a time when the planet was very different. It had been switched off for millions of years, but the code was still there, waiting. A forgotten switch in the dark engine room of your own body. The envoys had no idea if it could be activated, or what the consequences would be. But it was the only thing they had ever seen that wasn't immediately erased by the silence. It was a statistical anomaly, an aberration. It was hope. And just like that, the despair was ignited. It transformed into a desperate, ferocious fire. You had an answer. You had a chance. It might be a 1 in a trillion chance. It might kill you. But it was a chance. The plan was born in a single, global moment of shared understanding. There was no committee, no debate. The name for it bloomed in the collective human consciousness. Operation Firefly. The goal was simple, and insane. Awaken the light within humanity. Turn your entire species into a beacon, a weapon, a living shield against the devouring silence. The envoys could only offer the knowledge. The science, the risk, was all yours. Your scientists, your doctors, your engineers, they worked with a fervor never before seen. The greatest minds in your history joined together, united by a single, impossible goal. They had to figure out how to flip a genetic switch that had been dormant since before the dinosaurs. It was the most complex biological puzzle ever conceived. The envoy's data was a map, but it was a map to a land of dragons and sea monsters, a place from which no one had ever returned. The risks were immense. The procedure could simply fail. It could be lethal. It could turn a person into something unrecognizable, something monstrous. But what was the alternative? To wait for the silence? To watch your sun go out? Number, that was not the human way. You would not go quietly into the night. The call went out for volunteers. It was the most honest and terrifying job application in history. Wanted, heroes, must be willing to undergo a potentially lethal and transformative biological procedure. You may die. You may change in ways we cannot predict. Your sacrifice may save everyone, or it may do nothing at all. The odds are not in your favor. The response was overwhelming. Millions offered themselves. From every country, every walk of life, soldiers, teachers, farmers, artists. They lined up for a chance to shine, a chance to be the first. You watched the selections, the faces of the chosen few. They were not supermen. They were ordinary people filled with an extraordinary resolve. They were scared. You could see it in their eyes. But you could also see a light there, a determination that was brighter than any fear. They were the first to shine, the first fireflies. They said goodbye to their families. They walked into the sterile white labs, and they offered themselves to save everyone. The procedure itself was deceptively simple. A single injection, a cocktail of tailored retroviruses and quantum-resonant catalysts, designed to seek out the dormant gene and force it into an active state. The first volunteer was a young woman, a firefighter named Alara. You remember her smile. It was brave and a little sad. She lay on the medical table. The world watched on a live feed. The lead scientist, a man named Dr. Aris Thorne, leaned over her. His face was a mask of exhaustion and hope. He looked into the camera. "We do not know what will happen," he said. His voice was steady. "We are stepping into the dark. But we do not take this step lightly. We do it for everyone who has ever looked at the stars and dreamed, and for everyone who is yet to come." He looked at Alara. She nodded. The injection was administered, and then the waiting began. For several minutes, nothing happened. The world held its breath. The silence in the lab was as deep as the silence between the stars. Then, Alara gasped. Her back arched. Her vitals on the monitor began to spike wildly. A low groan escaped her lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. Her skin began to flush, a deep, angry red. Veins stood out on her arms and neck, pulsing with a strange, internal energy. This was the metamorphosis, the transformation. It was not gentle. It was a war being waged at a cellular level, a battle between what she was and what she was becoming. The pain was terrifying to watch. The doctors rushed to her side, but Thorne held them back. "We can't interfere," he commanded. "Her body has to win this fight on its own." Alara's body began to tremble violently. A faint steam rose from her skin. The temperature in the room was climbing. You watched, helpless, your heart pounding. Was this it? Was this how it ended? With a failed experiment and a dead hero? The first Firefly extinguished before she could even glow. Her groans turned into a silent scream. Her eyes were wide with a terror that transcended pain. It was the terror of being unmade, of her very atoms being rewritten. The monitors flatlined, one by one. A collective gasp went around the world. She was gone. The hope was gone. Dr. Thorne slumped against a console. Defeated. The dream was dead. For a full minute, the lab was a tomb, a monument to a failed gambit. But then, something happened. A flicker in the center of Alara's chest. A single point of soft, golden light. It was no bigger than a pinprick. But in the sterile white room, it was as bright as a star. The light pulsed. Once, twice. With each pulse, it grew stronger. It spread outwards from her heart, following the lines of her veins, tracing a glowing, intricate pattern across her skin. The dead monitors flickered back to life. They didn't show a heartbeat. They showed a steady, rhythmic wave of energy. Alara's body relaxed. The silent scream faded from her face, replaced by a look of profound peace. She opened her eyes. They were no longer the simple brown you remembered. They were pools of liquid gold. The light emanating from her was not hot. It was warm, comforting. It felt like the first sun on your face after a long winter. It was a light that did not cast shadows. It seemed to absorb them. It was a light against the void. She sat up. Her body was surrounded by a soft, gentle aura, a halo of golden energy. She looked at her hands. They glowed. She flexed her fingers, and sparks of light danced between them. A slow smile spread across her face. It was a smile of wonder, of triumph. She had walked through the fire and come out the other side. She was the first, the prototype, the proof that Operation Firefly was not a mad dream. The world erupted. Cheers and tears of relief flowed in equal measure. The despair that had gripped the planet was shattered, replaced by a fierce, burning hope. You had a weapon. You had a chance. The other volunteers, inspired by Alara's success, did not hesitate. They stepped forward. One by one, they took the injection. One by one, they endured the agonizing metamorphosis. And one by one, they began to shine. Not all of them survived. The procedure was still imperfect. For every 10 who went through the change, 2 were lost. Their bodies could not withstand the strain. They burned out, their light extinguished before it could fully ignite. Their sacrifice was not in vain. With each loss, the scientists learned more. They refined the catalyst. They improved the odds. The cost was high, but the price of failure was everything. Soon, you had an army of light, a few hundred men and women who could glow in the dark. It seemed like such a small thing, a parlor trick, but the energy they produced was immense. They could focus it, project it, create shields of solid light, or lances of pure energy that could pierce through steel. They were living weapons, your beautiful, terrifying fireflies. Training began immediately. They had to learn to control their new abilities, to work together, to become a cohesive fighting force. Alara was their leader. She was the strongest. Her light was the brightest. She taught them to harmonize their energy, to link their individual glows into something greater. A cascade of light that could form a barrier capable of deflecting incredible force. They learned to fight. They learned to defend. They prepared for a war against an enemy that had no concept of what a war was. an enemy that only knew how to consume. And then, it came, sooner than predicted. The envoy's calculations had been based on the Silence's steady, patient advance. But it had sensed something. A new light in a dark corner of the galaxy, a new flavor. The swarm arrived. It wasn't the slow, creeping stain the envoys had shown you. This was a fleet, the Vanguard, a hunting party sent to investigate the strange new energy signature, to extinguish the candle that dared to light itself. They appeared at the edge of your solar system, a fleet of shadows. They were not ships in the way you understood them. They were patches of perfect blackness, holes in space-time shaped like jagged shards of glass. They blotted out the stars behind them. They moved with a chilling, silent grace, and they were coming for Earth. The envoy's ships, which had remained in silent orbit, moved to intercept. They were not trying to fight. They were trying to buy you time. The envoy's beautiful seed-like ships met the Shadow Fleet. They did not fire weapons. They projected fields of energy, sacrificial barriers. The shadow ships did not slow down. They passed through the envoy's shields as if they weren't there. And when they passed through the ships themselves, the envoy's vessels simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris. One moment they were there, the next they were gone. Erased. It was a horrifying, silent display of power. The envoy's final gift to you was time, a few precious hours. The Shadow Fleet moved past the orbit of Neptune, past Uranus. They ignored the gas giants. Their target was clear, the third planet, the source of the irritating new light. On Earth, there was no panic. Not this time. There was a grim, cold resolve. This was the moment. The test. Everything you had worked for. Everything you had sacrificed. It all came down to this. The battle for Sol had begun. Your Fireflies, your tiny army of light, were deployed. They did not have spaceships. They didn't need them. They gathered on the moon, 100 glowing figures standing on the gray dust, waiting. Elara stood at their head, her golden light a brilliant beacon in the lunar darkness. She looked back at the Earth. Your beautiful, fragile blue home. It hung in the sky like a marble, and she would not let it fall. The Shadow Fleet approached, a swarm of silent, hungry locusts. They were impossibly fast. The distance to the moon was covered in minutes. This was it. The first contact. The first battle between light and the devouring silence. Elara raised her glowing hand. The other Fireflies mirrored her. They began to hum. A low, resonant note. The same note the universe had whispered to you months ago. But this time, it wasn't cold. It was full of warmth, of defiance. The lead shadow vessel, a massive shard of absolute nothing, came within range. Elara's eyes narrowed. Now, she projected. Not with her voice, but with her mind, with her light. 100 beams of pure golden energy lanced out from the moon. They struck the shadow vessel. There was no explosion, no sound. But the vessel reeled. Its perfect blackness flickered. For a split second, you could see the stars through it. The light was hurting it. The light was unmaking the unmaker. A collective cheer went up from every control room on Earth. It was possible. The impossible was possible. You could fight back. The Shadow Fleet seemed to pause, as if in surprise. It had never encountered resistance before. It had never felt pain. It did not know how to react. It had only ever known how to consume. And now, it was being consumed. The Fireflies pressed their attack. Lances of light crisscrossed the space between the Earth and the moon, a deadly web of energy. The shadow vessels began to break apart. They didn't explode into fire and shrapnel. They dissolved. They unraveled like threads from a tapestry, fading back into the nothing from which they came. For a moment, it looked like a rout, a victory. But the silence was ancient, and it learned quickly. The remaining ships changed their tactics. They stopped their direct approach. They began to swarm, to circle, to surround the moon. They were trying to cut off the Fireflies from Earth, to isolate the light source and snuff it out. They were learning strategy. A cold, alien intelligence was now directing them. The battle became a desperate dance. The Fireflies had to constantly shift their positions, defending against attacks from all sides. Their light was powerful, but it was finite. The metamorphosis had given them incredible power, but their bodies were still human. They grew tired. Their light began to dim. Alara saw it. She saw the fatigue in her soldiers. She saw their auras flicker. She knew they could not win a battle of attrition. The Shadow Fleet was too numerous. They had to do something decisive, something drastic. "Unify," she commanded. "All of it. All of you. Give it to me." This was the light cascade, a technique they had practiced but never perfected. It was incredibly dangerous. It required every Firefly to surrender their individual will, to pour all of their energy into a single point, into a single being. The Fireflies did not hesitate. They turned inwards, facing Alara. They raised their hands and projected their light not at the enemy, but at her. Beams of golden energy flowed from each of them, 100 streams of light converging on one person. Alara screamed as the power poured into her. It was more than any single body was ever meant to contain. Her own light exploded outwards, a nova of pure golden radiance. She became a sun. The light was blinding. It washed over the entire lunar surface. It struck the swarming Shadow Fleet, and the silence screamed. It was not a sound you could hear with your ears. It was a psychic shriek of agony that echoed in every human mind. The shadow vessels, all of them, began to dissolve at once. They couldn't withstand this concentration of pure, defiant life. They evaporated into the void. The battle was over. On the moon, the light subsided. Alara collapsed to the ground. Her own aura was faint, a guttering candle flame. The other Fireflies rushed to her side. They were exhausted, drained, but they were alive. And they had won. Back on Earth, the world watched in stunned, silent awe. Then, the celebration began. A single planet-wide roar of victory and relief. You'd faced the void, and you had held it back. The dawn that followed was scarred. The Shadow Fleet was broken. It had retreated back to the dark from whence it came. But the victory was costly. You had lost the envoys. Their silent sacrifice would not be forgotten. And you had lost good people. The Fireflies who had not survived the change, and the ones who had fallen in the battle. Their light was gone, but their memory burned brightly. The war was not over. This was just the first wave. The silence was still out there, and it knew about you now. It knew you could fight back. It would return, stronger, smarter. Humanity changed that day. You looked up at the stars, not with fear, but with purpose. You had a new role in the galaxy, a new duty. The envoys had been messengers. You would be guardians. You were the keepers of the light, the beacon against the endless night. Operation Firefly was no longer an experiment. It became the foundation of your society. The procedure was perfected, the risks minimized. More and more people underwent the change, not just soldiers, but doctors, engineers, farmers. The Firefly gene was no longer dormant. It became a part of what it meant to be human. It was a choice, a gift you could choose to accept, a way to contribute to the Great Defense. Your cities began to change. They were no longer lit by cold electricity, but by the warm, gentle glow of their inhabitants. Your world began to shine from within, a point of defiant light in a universe that was growing darker. The envoys had shown you a galaxy of ghosts, a universe of dying embers. But you refused to accept that future. You would not be another silent world. You would not be an echo. You would be a voice, a song of light and life. You became a beacon of hope for any other life that might be out there. Hiding in the dark, fleeing the silence. You sent out a new message, not a whisper of fear, but a roar of defiance. A simple message to the rest of the universe. We are here. We are shining. And we are not afraid. The Firefly gene spread through your species, a legacy of light passed down from one generation to the next. You carry that light within you. The hope for a brighter future, a future where the entire universe glows.